Now, there's one more piece I want to share with you here, written by George Orwell. Orwell apparently, Charles Pierce put this together. Charles Pierce, one of my favorite writers at Esquire. He writes there's something he didn't know, and I didn't know it either. He said he's read all the literary highlights by George Orwell, but he didn't know that in 1940, Orwell reviewed the latest edition or translation of Mein Kampf for the New English Weekly. Now, it goes without saying that Orwell, writing on Hitler, the writing would be brilliant and scathing, not merely concerning Hitler, as Pierce points out, but all the forces who enabled him to rise to power, thinking that Hitler's movement could be controlled. And the piece that Orwell wrote is also prescient, not merely for 1940, but for now. Orwell predicts in the piece that the temporary alliance notwithstanding, Hitler would get around to attacking Russia, which he ultimately did, of course. So here are some passages that Charles Pierce has presented from Orwell's review of Mein Kampf. And Charles Pierce says to us, to me, to you, see if there are modern applications. This is Orwell writing. The initial personal cause of his grievance against the universe can only be guessed at. But at any rate, the grievance is here. He is the martyr, the victim, Prometheus chained to the rock, the self-sacrificing hero who fights single-handed against impossible odds. If he were killing a mouse, he would know how to make it seem like a dragon. One feels, as with Napoleon, that he is fighting against destiny, that he can't win, and yet that he somehow deserves to. The attraction of such a pose is, of course, enormous. Half the films that one sees turn upon some such theme. Whereas socialism and even capitalism is a more grudging way. They have said to people, quote, I offer you a good time, end quote. Hitler has said to people, quote, I offer you struggle, danger, and death, end quote. And as a result, the whole nation flings itself at his feet. Perhaps later on they will get sick of it and change their minds, as at the end of the last war, after a few years of slaughter and starvation, greatest happiness of the greatest number is a good slogan. But at this moment, better an end with horror than a horror without end is a winner. Now that we are fighting against the man who coined it, we ought not to underrate its emotional appeal. And then Charles Pierce adds this. I plan on printing this out and putting it on the old refrigerator in preparation for the 2024 election. Yeah, you know, and that's the end of that piece. Thank you, Charles Pierce. And it became, or it has become, I should say, almost a trope about this orange bastard, this Hitler comparison. And I remember not so long ago when established media outlets, whether they were print or broadcast, insisted that any comparison, and a lot of Jewish organizations insisted this too, that any comparison of Hitler to of Trump to Hitler should not be allowed because of the singular horror that Adolf Hitler visited upon this planet. 80 million people wound up dead because of Hitler. 6 million Jews wound up dead. And for a while, that kind of made sense to me. I mean, okay, George W. Bush is responsible for more death than Donald Trump so far. But when you leave the bloody arena of how many people have died in World War I and World War II and Korea and Vietnam and on and fucking on and fucking on, if you can step away from that and look instead at the political implications. Hitler, Trump, Mussolini, Orban, Erdogan, Duterte, Modi, it just goes on and on. These wannabe tyrants, dictators, are everywhere because it is inherent. And this is what you'll discover when you read on aggression. It's inherent in human beings. And most of us are able to either ignore that urge to conquer and kill and assume enormous power. We ignore it because we have other things to do. We've got to do our art or feed our family or feed ourselves or go to work or build something to live in or, well, you know what I'm saying. But there are certain people among us who, historically, none of that shit makes sense. The only thing that makes sense is the violent, incessant accumulation of power and then the use of that power against everybody else. So the comparisons, premature as they may be right now, of Hitler and Trump are, as far as I'm concerned, they are not to be ignored. I mean, they're not to be. We ignore them. What's the expression? You ignore this at your peril. But here we are. I mean, Jesus Christ, every time I see a new poll on television, I see this gap between Trump and Biden. We can say what we want about Biden. I wish that the Democrats had a strong candidate who, I wish Biden would hold a press conference and say, look, okay, yeah, I'm having a hell of a time just walking down a runway. I'm having an awful time trying to keep my thoughts together. I can't give a simple little introductory speech without reading it off a teleprompter. Okay, I get it. And here's the person I want you to vote for in place of me because I'm not going to run against the orange bastard Nazi. Why won't Biden say that? Well, there's a quick answer because Biden suffers from an ego issue of his own. Not like Trump, but an ego issue that says, okay, so I'm 81, 82, whatever he is. I'm starting to look frail. The medical definition of frailty in an old person. I kind of stumble when I walk. My arms don't seem to want to swing right anymore. I have a roomy look in my eyes. Okay. But whoever's advising Joe Biden, this hardcore working class Catholic man, is not being straight up and honest with him, I don't think. But that's not the situation. The situation is Biden-Trump. So what are we going to do? I know what we're going to do. I know what we're going to. We being the collective noun, I'm using it. We, the American people, we are going to put Donald Trump back into the presidency. You know this. You know this is coming. You know it's on the horizon. And I think you can guess, whereas you may not know, but you can guess what the outcome of that is going to be. All of us who are alive next election day in November and the immediate aftermath will be able to know in our heart of hearts and in our minds that we were present at the end. None of us were present at the beginning of this experiment in democracy, but we are present at the end. If Donald Jesus Trump again, or even if he's not elected, he will make every effort that is humanly possible to incite his mobsters, his gang, his filth, these criminal fuckers who like to walk around pretending they're real men with their toy uniforms and their guns and shit. He will activate them if he doesn't get the presidency. And then we will witness something else, not just the end of democracy, but a war in this country, a bloody war that will just shock the world and end the United States. Not just end democracy or our experiment in self-government, but it will end the United States, because when that war is over, the word united will be a joke. There will be 3, maybe 4 different federations that used to be the United States. So if anyone around after it's all over wants to rename what we will become, it'll be the Federation of American States, not the United States. Too dark, too dreary, too negative? Yeah, well, no, it isn't. It's just very real. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.